Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'm really excited to have this esteemed panel joining me here to talk about newcomers to Canada. So just a short way by me, head of MPOWER Financing's capital markets team. MPOWER, to those that don't know, is a student lender for foreign students coming to Canada and the U.S. to study largely graduate student level programs. But today we're here to talk about newcomers to Canada, so why don't we start off with Collin here. Collin, when you think about newcomers, how would you compare or contrast what's going on in Canada in terms of population growth and also the openness of newcomers in terms of the incumbent community?
Amazing. A substantive topic for 4 p.m. at the last session of the conference, so excited to kick off. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Collin Galster. I'm COO and co-founder of Nova Credit. I'm very curious, before I just dive into the question, how many folks have heard of Nova Credit? Can I just see a quick raise of hands? Awesome. Just tell that to our marketing team doing a good job getting our name out there. I think you will also have heard of my co-panelist organizations, BMO and RBC, so I just wanted to level set where I stood in the pecking order. So for those of you who don't know us already, Nova Credit is a global credit bureau. So generally speaking, we solve the problem of helping people who are difficult to understand get access to credit. And the product that we're best known for here in Canada is a global credit bureau product, a cross-border credit bureau product. And we call that product the Credit Passport. We're the first ones in the world to pioneer that. And the way it works is we help newcomers get access to credit by building direct API integrations to their home country credit bureaus. And then we bring that data here into Canada, translate it, standardize it, and provide it to lenders who then offer them products and services. So that's what we do and who we are. So going back to the question, I think the question is about how Canada is unique with respect to newcomers and what to say on that. I think if you're in this room, you're probably already thinking about newcomers. Maybe another just quick poll, if you'll indulge me. Who here has a capability, a product, a team, a strategy focused on newcomers within your organizations? It's not everybody, but actually a pretty significant number of folks who have dedicated capabilities. That's one of the things that's unique about Canada. So when we founded Nova Credit almost a decade ago, we founded in the United States. So we're a US-based company. And if I'm completely honest, that was a mistake. We should have founded it in Canada, actually. We founded in the US because, I don't know, that's where the venture capital money is, and that's where it was sexy to do it. But the reality is that in Canada, newcomers are a much greater mindshare for almost every organization relative to the US. Now, when we looked at the market, we thought that in the U.S., it has the most number of newcomers, about 2 million newcomers that come to the U.S. every year. But in Canada, although the absolute number is smaller, as a percentage of the total population, it's a much larger share of the population who are coming in every year. And so the concentration of newcomers is just much greater here. The reason that's so significant is what you alluded to in the question, Chris, which is like every other major OECD economy, the birth rate among the domestic population in Canada is below the replacement rate. So it's about 1.4 in Canada, which puts it in the bottom third of OECD countries. So Canada is down there with like South Korea, and not as bad as South Korea, but it's down there with South Korea and a few other countries, such that, left to its own devices, the population would decline over time. In contrast to that, the population of Canada is going to grow by about 12 million people over the next 2 decades. And so 100%, actually more than 100% of the population growth is going to come from the newcomer population. And that's just a demographic reality that I think every organization in Canada is facing in their own way, depending on what products and services you're in. And so the thing that we think is quite unique about Canada is just the level of focus and attention. And you'll hear from some of the other panelists about what their organizations are doing with newcomers. But why we get excited is because up until this point, organizations facing the challenge of serving that population have had to do so flying blind. And by launching our product, the Credit Passport, into Canada, for the first time, when newcomers come to Canada, they're not just crossing a physical border, they're bringing their financial identity with them. And so they can start not literally from scratch, but at the same starting point that they're due based on their actual behaviors in their home country. So that's a little bit about what we see as unique about Canada.
Great, thank you, Collin. Maybe the next question I'll put to Amit and Sumit can answer one by one, but given you're both the banks in the room or bank representatives in the room, with Newcomers to Canada, how do you think about it? And in terms of like, what do you see as the opportunities, and what are the biggest drivers of growth for your franchises, and where have you seen progress already made to date?
Great, I'll start. I'll start by saying my name is Sumit. I lead customer growth, segments, and value proposition as written kind of up there for BMO, the retail bank in Canada. It's a long way of saying we look after all of the acquisition, multiple different segments. Newcomers, obviously, a very significant kind of segment in that. I know we have some headwinds going on these days based on political headwinds, what the government is saying, all of that. But still, I think everything that Collin said is super, super important. I think he's become more passionate based on the results overnight. So I think he likes Canada a little bit more than 24 hours before. But everything he said is valid. Like when you look at the people coming into Canada, I think you look at any report out there, the population growth is coming from immigration, right? Whether the number is 1 million, 1.5 million, 500,000, doesn't really matter here or there. It is coming from there. The labor force growth is coming from immigration. And I think one of the panelists before said a lot of the businesses that they're starting, a lot of the startups that they're doing is also coming from immigration. So needless to say, we at BMO see a big opportunity in that kind of segment. We've put out a lot of different products and experiences out there. We have our capabilities, which we call post-arrival and pre-arrival, depending on where you're coming from. We've obviously started working with Nova Credit, which is publicly available out there, and the credit passport solution that he talked about. So there's a lot of synergies, a lot of integration that we see, lots of challenges for newcomers as they come into the country based on which part of the world they're coming from. There's different geographies, etc. But again, we at BMO see a long-standing relationship with immigration and immigrants, and we feel for Canada that's going to drive a ton of growth. We might have a bit of hiccup here and there, but eventually I think we will rely on immigration because it served us well in the past, and no reason to believe it's not going to do that in the future as well.
I think Sumit covered it very well for both BMO and RBC, and it's the same mindset that we at RBC have when we think about the newcomers segment. It's about, first of all, meeting the needs of newcomers and then looking at like, okay, how do we solve the banking needs? How do we solve both the non-banking needs and the banking needs of this important segment? And how do we make sure that this important segment is positioned for success as they leave behind their previous country to find a home here in Canada? And then in the process, yes, absolutely, we have a good set of products, both strategies which target newcomers before they set their foot in Canada, but also how do we make them successful once they arrive there? And we made a tremendous progress in this path, and we'll talk about it more as we go along. But I remember 16 years ago when I landed here in Canada, a lot of stuff which did not exist at a time. A good example was we couldn't get an unsecured credit card. Didn't matter what kind of job you had, or what kind of a profile you had, or what kind of a credit history you had in your previous country. You had to put up a security deposit in order to get a credit card. And now, all the banks have unsecured credit card programs. Every bank has some kind of a newcomer strategy for mortgages, for auto finance, and so on and so forth. So made a lot of progress, but there is still a lot that we need to do more that we will definitely touch upon as we further move along.
Great. Now, Amit, maybe we'll keep it with you for a second. Just in terms of your launching of your kind of coming into Canada strategy, what have the lessons learned so far been in terms of what kind of maybe you went into it going, and then what's happened so far, kind of where you've been point on, where you've kind of things have come out differently than what you might have expected?
Maybe I can start, and then Sumit and Collin can elaborate more. So from a lessons learned point of view, the first piece is the journey for a newcomer starts in their home country. So how do we make sure that reach out to them even before sometimes they've even thought about whether they will come to Canada or go to a different geography? So how do we make sure that for the newcomers that we want to bring them to Canada, how do we reach out and start a conversation with them? And that's where we have now set up some partnerships, both with some banks, with educational technology companies, and so on and so forth. So that's one. The second piece is how do we make sure that as newcomers land here, how do we have the right processes for them? Newcomers are new to Canadian banking, but they're not new to banking. So how do we make sure that we have the right advice-centric proposition for them? How do we make sure that we are giving them that right set of tools which will enable them to succeed? And the third piece is, the information aspect of it. It's true that we don't know a lot about newcomers, or not as much about newcomers as much as we know about, folks who are born here. So how do we make sure that we get more information about newcomers to be able to make better decisions, both credit and non-credit decisions? And that is an area that we are investing further in, and we'll touch upon more as we go further along. But Sumit, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think everything Amit said kind of stands, but one of our biggest learnings, or at least my biggest learning, is we're here on a panel talking about newcomers as one segment. It is not one segment. The way we talk about it internally is it is a bunch of micro segments. It really depends on which country you're coming in from, whether it's India, China, Philippines, Vietnam, somewhere else, etc. And then which visa class you're coming in as well, right? So there's 3 different visa classes. There's a ton more, but 3 apparent ones in terms of permanent residency and the non-permanent ones. And it really, really differs in terms of what your need is, why you're coming to this country, what kind of products you need. So we're all in the business of, checking, savings, credit cards, loans, all of that. So that doesn't change, like the basic dynamics, and it doesn't change across the world. Those are the products that's available to other banks and other things that they would have seen. So first, I think, is that understanding that, where they come from differs in terms of what they want, why they're coming here. And it's easier to kind of put your hands around permanent residents and say they're looking to kind of move, they're looking to settle. So from a credit perspective, it's easier to kind of go into that decisioning and say they're looking to build a life, and they're giving up their lives in their home countries. And in some cases, they're all kind of well-to-do. Not everyone is. I know if you read the news too much, you'll see everyone's a temporary person trying to run away. That's not the case, at least not what we find in the market as such. And the second one I would say is all around credit a little bit. And education. So we at BMO spend a lot of time and money and time and effort on what we call BMO Smart Progress, which is our financial literacy platform. And there's a lot of education to be done, because while it's true that everyone's experienced banking in their home country, banking in Canada works differently than at least some of the other countries that are called upon. US, Canada might be similar, but the other countries might be slightly different. So getting into the education of what's a credit score, like why do I need a credit card to start with? The whole essence of you need credit to get more credit is sometimes an alien phenomena to a lot of people. And I remember similar to Amit's example, like when I came 17 years ago as a student at UFT, coincidentally I went across the street. It was a BMO branch, nothing to do with the job that I do today. But they said, you can get a secured card, you need to put $500 to get $500 on a card. And I said, lots of colorful language, but I'm like, if I had $500, why would I be here? That's an alien concept. Like, how does that work? And so we've come a long, long way. I think the industry's come a long, long way in terms of unsecured credit and doing all of that. But that whole education piece to say, why do you need a SIM card that goes on your file? Someday someone's going to pull a TU or an Equifax file on you, and this is what it shows. I think we're all trying to kind of upscale that and give that education today, and that's why a lot of work with Nova Credit as well on that, to say, just acknowledge that they come from different spots and they need the education, because like some of us didn't have it, and it's still a bit of a gap as we see in the market today.
Maybe if I want to pick up on something you mentioned at the start of your answer, Sumit, which is about newcomers not being a single monolith, but being a collection of a lot of different micro segments. We learned that lesson at Nova Credit through a story that I'll share, which is from early days for us. We were first building the business. We started in the U.S., which I mentioned. We had a lending partner that we had launched with, and they were struggling to figure out how to target newcomers. And so, we're a scrappy startup at that time, and so we were like, all right, we'll jointly co-market. We'll work on this together. We'll make some marketing investments. And so we did what tech companies do, and we started doing like an SEO strategy, digital marketing strategy. We started running LinkedIn ads saying, "Are you a newcomer? Are you an immigrant?" Testing different words and flavors and seeing what resonated, and none of it was working. None of it worked. It just didn't pan out, and we couldn't figure out why. And we're trying to iterate and pivot, and then one day, all of a sudden, literally overnight, we just saw this huge spike in the volume through this partner, and it was like a 10x overnight in what the volume was going on. So we were trying to open an investigation to be like, where is this coming from? Maybe one of our ads finally worked. And the insight was that when we finally geolocated where all the volume was coming from, it was all coming from like this one town in New York State. And it's coming from Stony Brook, New York. And so we sent a couple folks on site to go investigate and try to find some of these users and figure it out. And some of you may know, I see some smiles, Stony Brook's site of a major university in the U.S. And so it turned out that what had happened was this particular product that this partner of ours had launched had made its way into a WhatsApp group of the Indian students who are in electrical engineering at Stony Brook University. And so we basically tapped out the entire electrical engineering class of Indian students at Stony Brook University in one day, and it was amazing, and it drove a lot of value. And I think that was the aha moment when we realized that people are aware that they're immigrants or newcomers, but that is not the way to target them, right? They don't think like that because they're on a journey which has to do more with the visa class that they're on, with the corridor they're coming from, and why they're in the country in the first place. And so, word of mouth through a WhatsApp group is a difficult thing to scale and tap into, but that's a real world example, I think, of that lesson that we had to learn.
That's fantastic. And just by coincidence, I actually lived about 20 minutes from Stony Brook growing up. So that's just a segue anyway. But actually, Collin, let me take this back to you just on a slightly different topic. In terms of government policy, how do you think about that for Nova Credit in terms of how you think about newcomers to Canada and, what may have been, 6 or 12 months ago versus what is now versus what may be in the future? How do you kind of think about government policy and their plans?
Yeah, well, so from our perspective, I think one of the reasons why we exist is there was kind of a regulatory and legal aha moment early on in the company, which was realizing that, and this is one of the reasons why I think no one has built cross-border credit reporting before, is because in general, it's not legal for businesses to transfer credit data outside of national borders. That's generally speaking a restricted activity because you're dealing with sensitive private consumer data. And so exporting data is a no-no in many countries around the world, with one very, very, very important exception, which is that if an individual wants to access their own data, they have the right to do so in almost every jurisdiction around the world. And that aha moment that businesses don't necessarily have a right to export data, but consumers have a right to take custody of their own data is a really important unlock for us because it ended up architecting our entire business model, which is that the way we tap into data sources is through consumer permission. So the consumer is always the one who is permissioning into their own data that they have a right to access and control and move and use for their benefits. And so that insight, I think, was very critical to us kind of operating on a global basis. And I think that as privacy regimes around the world, including here in Canada, continue to evolve, the direction of travel is toward consumers having greater control, greater interoperability, greater ownership over information about themselves. And so from a newcomer's perspective, we think a lot about data portability, and the inspiration for the credit passport was the realization that people have credit activities outside of national borders. Whether or not you see it, it exists. And so being able to illuminate that activity by accessing the individual's data was a really important insight. I think there's other government considerations, which I think we alluded to, which maybe we should talk about. But I think I'll stay away from politics here on stage. But there's an election in the U.S. That has shifted things. I think the Canadian government has made an announcement that there's an intent to reduce the overall number of PRs by about 20%. But that takes the number of PRs, say next year, from 500,000 a year down to 400,000. So it's not going to zero. I think the reality is that government intervention will shape the overall shape of the newcomer population. But at the end of the day, it's a demographic trend, as we talked about at the beginning. And so as a matter of priority and as a matter of having to deal with the reality of that population, we don't think that's going away.
Amit or Sumit, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I don't think we'll comment on government policy on a stage here, but Sumit, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier, like obviously the government will do what it needs to do. No matter what the number is, I don't think it shifts the focus for any of the Canadian banks, as much as I wish it did for some of our competitors, and we could take it all. But just being realistic, I think it's a good pie there, and there's good value. That's why all the banks want to play in that space. That's why the fintechs or the other startups kind of want to play in that space, because there's value. Otherwise, if there's no value exchange, like no one would be in that segment. And so there's clearly upside there and there's enough space for everyone to kind of play. Everyone has a different angle to it, different partnerships, different ecosystems, etc. So while we can control what the government's going to do, we know that immigration is important for Canada, and I think as much as we don't have a crystal ball, like it'll come around.
That's great. Thank you. Now, I know, again, Nova Credit is getting a free advertisement here being on the panel in terms of being a data and solutions provider. But when you're thinking about these newcomers, and a lot of them may have thin credit files or no credit files, for that example, to the extent that a Nova Credit is not able to bridge the gap in terms of that credit analysis, maybe I'll put this to the bankers here on the panel first. How do you think about underwriting these borrowers or customers as they may be for you?
Yeah, so from the point of view of, as we chatted, we do have all the banks, including RBC and BMO, have their own newcomer programs for products like credit cards, of course, and then some of them also have those for auto finance, mortgages, etc. So definitely, we're not where we were 16, 17 years ago when these programs did not exist. The key pieces, how do we enrich those programs with more information? How do we get more information about newcomers, which allow us to make the right decisions for them? If we are offering relatively lower credit limits on day one, how do we graduate those newcomers to higher limits very quickly, or right at the point of inception? Can we get more information, which is where Nova has some good solutions that I don't think I'm sharing any secrets here, but some of the banks, including us, are using some of those solutions now. But yes, there is still space for innovation in this space, both in terms of quality of information and how that information gets utilized is something that we continue to explore as we move further along.
Yeah, I think we were, all the banks were playing in that space. Like we said, we've come on a journey 15, 20 years ago to where we are today. Whether we work with Nova Credit or we do it in-house, the answer is not yes or no. It's a question of, we all love data, we all love analytics. I think that everyone in this room would want to have more data, more integrated solutions, answers, etc. And BMO is no different. We're looking for that all the time. And I think Nova Credit gives us that angle to get more data in there, more insights on people who are coming from different parts of the world that we might not have access to on day one. But in the absence of any of those data points, we would still rely on our models. And again, Amit's part of the risk team. I'm more on the business side rather than on the risk side. But everyone has their own in-house models, and we rely on what the adjudication strategy is going to be, what's the line management going to be. None of us, want to make a loss on it, etc. So it's all about enhancement with different data points that we can kind of get into the ecosystem, and this happens to be one of them. There's going to be tons of other opportunities that come. If someone can, tell you what kind of job you're going to get, what kind of income you're going to get, the more data you have, the better risk decision you can make at the end of the day. So I think this just opens the door for multiple things that the banks can kind of ingest and other fintechs in the space as well, and make those decisions, which is, at the end of the day, it's beneficial for the customer. Like we often say at BMO, we're not, I know we're on an underwriting panel talking about newcomers, but we look at it as checking, savings, and cards. And there's a reason for it. It's not because we just want to sell those products, but we firmly believe that's what the customer wants. So we're driven by what a customer's goal is. And if you think about it, you want to come, you want to have a transaction, you want to save money, because we all know the Canadian dream is to buy a house. It maybe got a little bit easier with the interest rate cuts than it was a little while ago. And then you want credit, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to buy a house, you want to buy a car, all of those things. So we kind of look at that as a trio, and then all the other products around it, to say that that's what the customer wants, and that's why we should be in there. And anything and everything that helps us enhance that decisioning, I would say, is definitely an open conversation for us.
Great.
Do you mind if I jump? I just want to add our perspective, because I think we would agree that when you're trying to serve newcomers, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. I think that's consistent with what we've been saying. And our capability, the credit passport, is, we think, a really powerful tool that can fit into a broader newcomer strategy. But ultimately, every lender is going to have their own core competencies, their own strategic differentiation, their own go-to-market strategy. So there's going to be variation. And we've spent 10 years basically flying around the world, racking up frequent flyer miles, building integrations with bureaus around the world. And we have integrations that we can cover about 70% of newcomers into Canada through about 24 countries that we cover and can fetch data from. But there's always going to be this long tail challenge of the countries that we can't cover, because as much as I would love to have 100% coverage of every country around the world, the reality is some countries just don't have mature enough credit reporting systems. Some countries don't have any credit reporting systems, or have systems that are not commensurate, that would have too much challenges from a regulatory compliance perspective. And so our view is that what the role we serve is as one piece of the puzzle, and we think it's a really powerful piece of the puzzle. But as you've heard from the other panelists, it's not the end of the story. There's got to be a comprehensive strategy to deal with newcomers.
Great. Thank you, all three. I know we're short on time here, and everyone's probably looking outside and thinking about having a drink, so I don't want to keep you longer. But just maybe a quick round here in terms of thoughts on customer acquisition cost and ROI of the newcomers versus the incumbent citizens of Canada. How do you think about it? Is it a different kind of risk-return profile that you kind of see because of the fact of the uncertainty of the thin credit files and even working with Nova Credit? Or do you want to see this be like a kind of a return on equity, or return on capital be similar to your existing kind of core businesses?
Yeah, I don't think I'm, again, sharing any state secrets by saying that the newcomer segment is quite profitable. There's a longer payback period compared to a non-newcomer new client acquisition that we might do. But having said that, all the banks, including RBC, are in this for the long game. The intent is not to make a quick buck here, and actually, to frankly speaking, make sure that folks who are coming to the country, they're set up for success, and that's what we like to invest in when we think about this segment.
Yeah, I think the ROI is there in all of those different segments. Like the way we look at it, whether, and I have the privilege running the overall acquisition, like I said, so we look at mass, like Canadians on soil as well. We look at newcomers, we look at like 6 different segments, etc. Each of them have a different value attribute to it, and each of them have their space. Like the way, when you have to get to your eventual numbers and your targets and market share, you pull at all of those levers, because no one thing can get you there. So I think as much as you can't just say that one gives me the highest return, so I will get the maximum out of one bucket and ignore the other ones, it's just not going to work that way. Like we have a huge, value proposition that we look at. When I say like indigenous customers, etc., that's important as we sit here on Canadian soil, and it differs. Like when you look at the value segmentation from, and I'll pick 2 extremes, like a newcomer coming from China versus coming from India, it differs. Because we know China has certain rules in terms of how much money you can take out of the country. Every year you can do certain things, etc., all of that, whereas some other countries don't have it that way. But at the end of the day, do they all kind of get to very similar spots? They do. Like when we look at the share of wallet at the end of the day, everyone wants to, own a home. They want to have a car. They want to have the kids go to a good school, have good education, all of those things. Buy a good home in a good neighborhood. So it varies a little bit here and there, but at the end of the day, we see like tremendous value in the overall in the segment, even relative to some of the other segments that we kind of see. And I'd say like we look to kind of maximize that opportunity as much as possible.
Well, I know we're over time here, so I don't know, Collin, if you had any closing remarks to that question. Otherwise,
I'll just offer maybe just one final thought. I promise I'll keep it quick. I think the way you heard about the ROI perspective from the folks actually doing the lending, I think the reason folks choose to work with us on the Credit Passport product is because it's a strategic capability. And, as a business, doing business in Canada, doing lending in Canada, you're going to be serving newcomers one way or another. The only question is, do you want to be doing that with a more complete data set or not? And that's fundamentally, I think, what drives a lot of the excitement about what we have in Canada. So.
Well, thank you, everyone who attended, and your attention here. And thank you to the panelists for coming and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Chris, for being an amazing moderator.